Okay, so we're now live on YouTube. So we finally come to an end of our tutorials for cybersecurity. And in the next tutorial, we will have our assignment discussion. So in today's session, we're going to be able to manage cybersecurity in the organization. So from our indicative contents, we're going to look into how we will install protection methods on endpoint devices, set up and configure group policies on softwares, set up and configure monitoring software on the network. So as we can see from our first learning outcome, we already introduced our endpoint and how they be managed within an organization. So when it comes to endpoint security, the device might include mobile and desktop computer. So point of sales terminals, POS, cellular phone, industrial devices, and even connected household appliance. So as we all know, there are several policies which have to be followed within the organization. And these policies, we spoke about them, such as bring your own device, where employees have the choice to bring their own device and use it within the organization. And then there are other policies for those that do not want to work with their own device and they rather use something provided by the company. And also, when it comes to this type of security, we can see that the typical strategy to secure endpoint is to deploy endpoint security software on the devices themselves. So as we can see, in order to keep them safe, we have to deploy these applications into the devices. So the software aims to protect endpoints from malware and risk user behavior. So it's not just from external attackers, but even from human mistakes. And this system should be able to detect intrusion and assist security teams in identifying and stopping attacks targeted at endpoints. So as we can see, the importance of securing these endpoints is through protecting them, as we will mention, where in an enterprise there are large number of IT devices, IT infrastructure, which they continually keep growing, and since the business is growing, then the requirements of IT infrastructure will grow at the same time. Therefore, it will be really important to track and ensure that all these endpoint devices are protected. Also, as I mentioned here, there are security remote working, where many employers now they either provide employees with mobile devices, as I mentioned, and they bring them their own personal device to work, which this will increase their productivity and contribute to employee satisfaction. Also, we have to look into protecting identity, whereby doing so, we now protecting all the IT perimeter that are not applicable. So, for instance, now that the perimeter has been extended far beyond the organization of the network, security means must be applied to all the devices which belong to the employees or even their third parties. So this image can illustrate the type of the entities which are involved in this security system. So as we can see, the features of endpoint, for instance, cloud computing, email and web protection, network protection, desktop protection, risk, competence, data protection, server protection, and mobile security. So these all components are at the core of our endpoint security solution. Now that we have introduced what are these features, we have to look into how we're going to install these methods. So there are various types, various ways how we can do that. So for instance, we can create and install packages to redistribute. So for example, we can use Active Directory GPO or systematic IT management suites in order for us to use these methods, which they now create packages to use with software deployment. Also, there is invite users, where the method will now invite users through email to enroll the devices with the endpoint security. So by sharing this email, this code, this link, and they can now sign up and have our endpoint protected by any type of cyber attack. Also, there is discover and deploy, which in this method, it simply creates a package to use with software deployment, which will suit on your choice. And then we have mobile device management, MDM deployment, where with this type of methods, we're going to configure our mobile device management, which will be provided to import Windows devices as unmanaged devices. So what happens is that once this device appears managed, we can now enroll the device with push enrollment. So this image now shows like a type of workflow. So we can see how we're going to onboard the Windows 10 devices using our mobile database management tool, where we have an admin, which is directly accessing Azure, Microsoft Azure, and the admin at the same time has a different point where you can manage it. So we can see there are two admin where they can use Microsoft Defender ATP, or even another software which is Microsoft Intune. So as I mentioned from the other tutorial, where we're looking into this endpoint security software, I made the example of BlackBerry and Invati, but even Microsoft have their own software, which is Microsoft Intune. And the benefits of using this is that they can now protect our endpoint. So for example, from the image, you can see that our Windows 10, iOS, or Mac OS devices are now registered, and they can now be monitored by this endpoint software. Also, this is a quick image which explains how the process is being done, where you have to prepare, set up, and you now conclude with onboarding the device into the software. So looking into more details, now we're going to see how to set up and configure group policies of software. So what do we mean by group policy of software? We can now see a couple of methods which are used to deploy. So we can now either assign the software or publish your software. So when it comes to assigning, it means that a program can be assigned with a pre-user and a pre-machine. Therefore, this assigned pre-user will be installed when the user is logged on. While with the published software, the program can be published for one or more users. So it has the ability to connect into multiple endpoints. Also, for the steps, we have to create a distribution point where we're going with the first step. We're going to be deploying a MSI through our GPO, which we're going to create a distribution point on our publishing server. So this can happen by following these 4 steps, where we have to log on to our server as an administrator. Then we are going to create and share the network folder. Once that has been done, we can now set permission on the folder in order to allow access to distribution packages. And then we're going to copy the MSI in the share folder. So now we're looking at how to create a group policies object, where in order to create them, we have to follow these steps, where we will have to click on the start button and open go to start. Then after that, you have to open group policy management, expand forest, domains, and after that, you have to right click on the group policy object and select new. Once that has been done, you now have to enter the name of the policy and leave the source start the GPO as a known value. Also here are other steps for us to assign a MSI package, and they're quite long steps to follow, which will be ideal to be done through a tutorial rather than having a theoretical explanation. Also here there are the steps that have to be followed when publishing an MSI package. Now we're going to look into set up and configure monitoring software on a network. So when this happens on the network, we have to initially identify the critical devices on the network. So the devices which could be easier to hack and which are more compromised. Once we have figured which devices are more subject to attacks, we can now define a network policy where we will have several questions and we need to target them in order to identify how this monitoring system can happen. So once we've established the steps to follow, we can now configure WMI and SSH on Windows or Linux server, where with this setup, our server will work with WMI and secure server host network, which will allow our network to monitor software and also to pull details and information about our Windows or Linux machine. Also, as we can see, usually it's as simple as providing a username and a password through LDAP or Active Directory, but most of the time the authentication or firewall issue will now arise, where these components are going to clash with each other. Also now, when setting up networks monitoring software, we have to look into configuring also SNPM on a network device, whereby SNPM will then provide with valuable data about our status of our network device. So this will make easier to monitor and see the network performance. Also, network switches, routers, hubs, and printers commonly use SNPM, but the difference is that the protocol might be disabled by default for security reason, in order to not have maybe too much traffic on that network. This appliance might not be connected into the network. Also, I'm going to look how to set a baseline for network performance, which we will now be actively measuring our CPU and the monitor memory usage. And with this baseline, the disk utilization and other key network metrics, or just taking a mental model of user behavior gives us with the context to understand whether it is actively spike a device in experience, which is unusual or is simply expected. So by using this network performance, we can now track and see if the performance is unusual or is just simply expect to come with these results. Then there are also the ability to set up alerts and customize threshold levels, where this software can now simply check on the workflow and also provide information on alerts, which will make smart decisions. Also, we have to look into create a plan for when we have to receive these alerts. So, for instance, getting the right alerts is just the start of putting our files around the network. So when we establish the timing for sending out these alerts, we can now promptly monitor the performance and also ensure that the team will be ready in order there'll be, in case there might be any type of cybercrime. So, for instance, if an alert comes in, we now should be known of which person, network administrator, help desk tech should be contained, and what type of event the next step has to be. Also, we have to keep an eye on other devices, our own device. So as we can see, the main point of network monitor is to keep a watchful eye on all the critical devices in order for us to minimize or even prevent from the disruption of critical service. So with this, we've gone through all the important steps that have to be taken when we configuring network monitoring softwares. So in our next tutorial, we're going to have an assignment discussion. Is there any question for me?
No questions. Or we can discuss the assignment tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow. Okay. Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks,
And,
Victor. Just one quick query, if you can answer that.
yeah,
When can you receive that assignments that I have submitted? When will
I
you
will
receive it?
I will send an email now to the email address which is monitoring the assignments. I will send it now.
Okay.
So once I receive it, I will email you back. I will reply to you. But I think I'll receive it today because if I email them now, they'll pretty much send me straight away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I mean, going forward, you want me to loop you all as well, because you mentioned in the email that I have to send to that email address only.